The police have their culprit dead to rights. There's evidence, witnesses, and the criminal has even confessed, and they're going to go free because they're a diplomat. Why is diplomatic immunity so powerful, and what are the craziest cases where it was ever used? Diplomatic immunity, or the protection from prosecution for ambassadors and agents of a foreign government, can cause some big problems for the host country, but it's better than the alternative. In history, ambassadors could face brutal reprisals if they brought the ruler of the country they were visiting unwelcome news. Most famously, the representative of the Persian king Xerxes brought a list of demands to the Spartans and was rewarded by being thrown down a well. Whether any Spartan screamed, "This is Sparta!" has been lost to history. Slowly but surely, a new standard emerged. The Indians might have been the first people to come up with the concept of diplomatic immunity, as ancient Hindu epics refer to messengers being protected from capital punishment. In the Sanskrit epic Ramayana, the demon king Ravana is even warned to not harm the Hindu god Hanuman in his role as a diplomat, and it started catching on because violating it could have big consequences. When a German envoy was leaving the city of Tarentum, some locals insulted him, and it caused the diplomatic conflict to deteriorate further. Of course, this wasn't really good for anyone. The ensuing war was called the Pyrrhic War for a reason, and the idea of diplomatic immunity picked up some unlikely champions. One of the first rulers to insist on diplomatic immunity was Genghis Khan. But the powerful Mongol ruler wasn't just protecting visitors. He demanded the same protection for his own ambassadors and did not hesitate to launch brutal wars against anyone who dared harm them. Diplomats were even exempt from paying taxes under most circumstances, a perk most people would be happy to sign up for. It wouldn't be long before it spread around the world. One bad incident with a diplomat could start a war, so it was much easier to just have a blanket policy. Leave them alone. After a Russian ambassador to London was abused by legal officers in 1709, the British Parliament passed a law guaranteeing diplomatic immunity. As relations grew with countries around the world, it became safer to travel for diplomats if they knew that they wouldn't be arrested if the meeting went south. And with that, being a diplomat went from being a high-risk occupation to one of the most sought-after positions in the world, but no protections are absolute. During the early days, diplomatic immunity was mostly limited to the countries in Europe, with who Britain valued relations. That meant that a German or Russian ambassador could rest easy, but someone from the Ottoman Empire might be in a more precarious position. Those perks were usually gifted only to nobility or allies to the government, and they only lasted as long as both governments agreed. When the French monarchy fell and the revolutionary government took over, many diplomats were arrested for supposedly being loyal to the former government. Even during World War II, diplomatic immunity was preserved and ambassadors were typically allowed to evacuate peacefully. But that wasn't the case in 1979 when the government of Iran fell and the U.S. Embassy was attacked by a group of radicals who took 52 Americans hostage for over a year. It brought the two countries to the brink of war, and hostilities continue to this day, with Iran being designated as a state sponsor of terrorism and the two countries regularly fighting each other through proxies. Diplomatic immunity may be thousands of years old, but it has an even older cousin. How do you arrest a king or a president? The answer is usually you don't. Sovereign immunity is usually granted to the head of a state, both for crimes within their country and protecting them from arrest abroad. But this has a few more limitations than diplomatic immunity. For one thing, it generally only lasts when a president is in office. It's fairly common for national leaders to be arrested for crimes committed in office once they're gone, but trying to arrest a president or king while they're abroad would be likely to start a war. And in both cases, there's only one real way this immunity doesn't work. Is a diplomat or national leader who commits a crime truly immune from any prosecution? The answer is generally yes, with one exception. If the state is truly fed up with someone's actions and their crimes have given the state a black eye, it's not unheard of that they'll willingly waive diplomatic immunity for them, essentially saying they're on their own and leave them in the hands of their host country. But this is rare, and if they say no, the most the host country can do is usually expel the ambassador and send them home. But one area of diplomatic immunity causes more controversy than any other. It's not just the diplomat who gets immunity, it's every member of his or her immediate household, usually including their spouse and children, but possibly others who live with them. This causes headaches for local authorities, like when a teenager just graffitied a cop car and they have to let him go because his dad's the ambassador to Liechtenstein. But it serves a purpose. If the ambassador's children could be arrested by the host country, they would be vulnerable to political pressure, and the restrictions on who's covered protect the host country, so they don't have to worry about second cousin Steve starting to rob banks because his cousin's an ambassador. But that hasn't stopped some diplomats from causing major problems for their home countries, and vice versa. It was one of the lowest points in American-British relations in recent years when a car accident turned into an international flashpoint. 19-year-old Harry Dunn was riding his motorcycle in England when he was hit by a car driving the wrong way, killing him instantly. It seemed like a clear-cut case of manslaughter. Except the driver, Anne Sakoulis, was the wife of a diplomat and she returned to her home country. British politicians and the family of the victim angrily demanded that she be returned to Britain, but neither Donald Trump nor Joe Biden seemed willing to wait waive diplomatic immunity, with many of her defenders saying it was just a tragic accident. Even espionage can be smoothed over with diplomatic immunity. In 2008, representatives of the US, Mexico, and Canada met to discuss North American issues. They were asked to leave their phones outside for security purposes, and they disappeared while they were on the inside, leaving countless pieces of classified information in unknown hands. A thorough search revealed that Rafael Quintero Curiel, a member of the Mexican president's press team, had stolen them and was about to board a plane back home. He was taken into custody, claimed diplomatic immunity, and only fessed up when he was shown a video of him taking the phones. While he did agree to turn over the phones, the government let him go, and he only faced minor punishment back home. Sometimes an act of war can even go unpunished. In 1984, the Libyan dictator Gaddafi was seen as one of the most dangerous men in the world, and his diplomats were notoriously unpredictable. But no one expected what happened in London. As a group of protesters gathered outside the embassy, someone fired on the crowd from within the embassy, killing British policewoman Yvonne Fletcher. Police surrounded the embassy in an extended standoff, but Libya refused to answer any questions about the culprit and even arrested British nationals in retaliation. Eventually, Britain stood down and the diplomats returned to Libya, but this played a role 2 years later as Britain aligned with the US in the bombing of Libya. One incident nearly took down a plane. It was 2010 when Qatari ambassador Mohammed al-Madadi was flying to Denver. He had an urge for a smoke break, but he was high in the sky where smoking was banned. He wasn't deterred. He went into the airplane bathroom, turned off the smoke alarm. He proceeded to smoke a particularly stinky pipe until a flight attendant confronted him. When she demanded to know what he was doing, he stated that he was trying to light his shoes on fire, a reference to the notorious shoe bomber Richard Reed. Not only was al-Madadi taken into custody by the fire marshals, but the pilot put out a potential terrorist alert and fighter jets were scrambled. Despite causing a terrorist scare, al-Madadi still had diplomatic immunity and returned to Qatar after one very costly smoke break. But one case of diplomatic immunity abuse shocked the world. It was 1967 in Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. Sao Boonwat was the ambassador from Burma and had a long history as a diplomat. No one expected him to be at the center of a sordid tale of sex, lies, and murder. His wife Shirley was a major figure in high society and was romantically linked to local musician Rex de Silva. Then she was found dead, supposedly from a cerebral hemorrhage. But there was just one problem. Witnesses had heard gunshots and saw Boonwat dragging his wife off. He would later change his story, claiming that the gun went off accidentally, but there wouldn't be much time to investigate. Her body was burned on a traditional funeral pyre on the consulate grounds, eliminating much of the evidence. While the Ceylon authorities wanted to hold him accountable, Burma recalled him back to his home country, and what happened next is largely unknown. But not all diplomatic immunity controversies are large-scale. Some are small, but cause no less chaos. The most common way diplomatic immunity is abused? Parking tickets. If the average person parks in the wrong spot, they'll get a ticket and have to pay it or waste a day in court. Diplomats get tickets too and proceed to dump them right in the old circular file. With no way to hold them accountable, diplomats park wherever they want, racking up a shocking 143,000 parking tickets in 1996 alone. Even more shocking, one country was responsible for almost a quarter of those summonses: Russia. Some ambassadors have gotten creative when they try to exploit immunity. The UN ambassador from Mozambique had married an American woman and wanted a divorce, but the problem was his immunity made it impossible to appear in court unless it was waived. He asked his home country to open him up to liability, filed for divorce, and promptly had the court award his $5 million estate to his wife. He then tried to claim diplomatic immunity to keep from paying. The court battle went all the way up to the Supreme Court, but ultimately the arrogant ambassador had to pay up. A pair of dog lovers found out that diplomatic immunity didn't extend to man's best friend. In 1984, a Mexican military attaché was fined for keeping a pack of 10 basset hounds at his home when local zoning laws only allowed for 4. He applied for protection from the State Department, but was turned down, with the government reasoning that the protection didn't extend to local regulations. But even he didn't have the nerve of one Barbados diplomat. In 1975, his German Shepherd was notorious around the neighborhood for biting people. When animal control officials warned him that the dog could be taken into custody, he claimed that the dog was a member of his family and had immunity and could bite whoever he wanted. While he warned of an international incident, the governments didn't agree. Dogs may be man's best friend, but they don't get that family immunity. As for sovereign immunity, one German man decided to put that to the test. It was 2011 when Pope Benedict XVI was paying a visit to his home country of Germany. He rode in the Pope-mobile down a closed street, and one eagle-eyed and rules-minded German man noticed something. The Pope wasn't wearing a seatbelt, in violation of local laws. This no-nonsense watcher reported this to the government authorities and filed a complaint. He was ready to call witnesses and take it to court, all with the intention of getting the Pope a fine of up to 2,500 euros. It was a tense standoff with Vatican City over questions of sovereign immunity and the Pope's role as a head of state, until local authorities pointed out one detail. Because roads were closed, traffic laws were suspended, and the Pope got off scot-free.